There is a particular kind of silence that follows a scream. Not the quiet you get after a long day, not the hush of a house going to sleep. I'm talking about the silence that means something has already happened. The kind of silence that carries a question you can't ever unask. Did anyone hear her? A young woman walks home from class, on the edge of the life she's always dreamed of. She's days away from becoming a nurse. She's planning content for TikTok, thinking about the celebration, the photos and cap and gown, the patients she'll one day care for. But today she's walking back to an apartment she no longer feels safe in. She's on the phone with her mother. She opens the door. She sees something that tells her this isn't just a disagreement anymore. And then her mother hears it. That shift in her daughter's voice from irritation to terror. She calls out for help 3 times. The call drops. The silence begins. And the question that sits at the center of this episode is this: how many systems have to ignore a woman's warnings before we finally admit the danger was never unforeseeable? Welcome to the Lounge of Truth. I'm Dr. D, and this is Cigar A Crime. This space is for the stories that should have been stopped before they became headlines. The ones where someone asked for help, documented the danger, followed the rules, and still didn't make it home. Tonight, we're talking about Elizabeth Tammy Odunsi, a 23-year-old nursing student from Texas Women's University, a rising TikTok creator known as Tammy Dollars, a woman who moved across the ocean to care for others, and whose own safety was treated like an afterthought. We are going to walk you through her life, her dreams, the warning signs she reported, the roommate she never should have been paired with, and the systems that stamped approved when the answer should have been absolutely not. In the lounge tonight, I'm keeping it clean and honest, just the story, the smoke, and the truth. Before we step deeper into Tammy's story, let's talk about tonight's cigar. I'm lighting up the Arturo Fuente from the Chateau Fuente series, a classic, elegant, deceptively gentle on the first draw. You get creamy cedar right out the gate, a whisper of sweetness, and then that subtle way Arturo Fuente blends can surprise you. A slow burn build into something richer, fuller, more present. This is a cigar that looks soft but carries strength. It's wrapped in this signature cedar sleeve like it's being protected. But inside this wrapping is a complexity you'll only understand once you spend more time with it. And that's why I chose it for Tammy. She was exactly the kind of spirit, gentle at first glance, sweet in her energy, soft voice on TikTok as she gave nursing tips. But behind the sweetness was resilience. Imagine being 17, leaving London, leaving family, crossing an ocean alone, just to chase an education that would let her care for others. That's cedar-wrapped strength, softly presented, deeply rooted. And just like this cigar, she was crafted with intention. Every leaf in this cigar is selected, aged, and placed for a purpose. Nothing accidental. And Tammy lived her life that way too, with intention, with compassion, with a purpose that showed in how she studied, how she created content, and how she supported others. But here's where the cigar symbolism lands hardest. The Chateau Fuente is a cigar that only reveals its power when treated with respect. Once mishandled, once ignored, the burn becomes uneven. The experiences become harsh. The beauty of it is lost. Tammy deserved that same respect, that same protection, that same care. Instead, she was placed in a situation where the people responsible for her safety handled her life with negligence, not intention. Tonight, this cigar becomes a reminder. Some people, like some cigars, are treasures, and mishandling them has consequences far beyond the surface. So if you're somewhere safe, go ahead and light one with me. If not, just sit with me here in the lounge, because this story, like this smoke, deserves every ounce of attention we can give it. Let's start where we always should, with who she was before the headlines. Elizabeth Tamilore Odunsi, known to most as Tammy, was born and raised in London, British Nigerian. The kind of kid whose family already see the path in front of her. She was going to do something that mattered. At 17 years old, she did something most adults are still too scared to attempt. She moved alone from London to Houston, Texas. New country, new culture, new school. And oh yeah, a global pandemic just a few months away. While a lot of us were trying to figure out how to bake banana bread in lockdown, Tammy was out there navigating immigration, academia, and life in the United States with her eyes fixed on one goal: nursing. She enrolled at Texas Women's University, a place that would quickly become more than a school. It became her community. Professors and classmates later described her as driven, kind, laser focused on becoming the kind of nurse who didn't just treat symptoms but saw the whole person. And if you knew her online, you might have known her by another name. They call her Tammy Dollars on TikTok. On that platform, she was building something quietly powerful, sharing her nursing journey, study sessions, day in the life videos, encouragement for other students who felt overwhelmed. Her content had this soft-spoken confidence. You can do this. I'm doing it too. She wasn't chasing controversy. She wasn't doing stunts. She wasn't twerking. She was building community. Friends say she loved working with kids, that she talked often about serving underrepresented communities in healthcare. She knew what it felt like to be the one who didn't quite fit the mold. Foreign student, young woman of color, in a demanding program. And she wanted to show up as a kind of provider who made people feel safe. Family members describe her as playful, faith-filled, deeply loyal, the kind of sister that would FaceTime you between classes just to check in, the kind of daughter who still called home while walking back from school, even years after leaving home. By April of 2025, Tammy was in the final stretch. Her last semester, her countdown to graduation, cap and gown ready, content ideas sketched out for I did it on TikTok. She was, as her family would later say, quite literally at the finish line. And that's exactly where this story becomes unbearable. Now let's talk about how she ended up in that apartment with that goddamn roommate. So, the roommate match. Tammy's off-campus housing wasn't some random Craigslist deal. She went through an actual housing company in Houston. A business whose whole job is connect students and renters with available rooms and roommates. They market themselves as a safe solution, one that includes background checks and matching services. Through this company, Tammy was placed in an apartment with a man about twice her age. He wasn't a student at her university. He wasn't a young 20-something just trying to split rent. This mofo was around 40 years old, and his name Christopher Chester Grant. Within a couple of months of living together, things started to feel wrong. According to legal filings and Tammy's family, about a week before her life ended, there was an accident in the apartment. It started over something that sounds small. Their cats. But anyone who's ever lived with a volatile person knows the topic is rarely the real issue. This argument escalated. Grant allegedly knocked Tammy's phone out of her hand. He poured some kind of liquid on her face. And according to the complaint, he essentially told her she was as good as gone. Now pause here for a second. You're 23 years old, far from home, living with a man twice your age. You don't know that well. He's just gotten physically aggressive with you. You're scared. Tammy did what we tell people to do. She called Houston police. She reported the incident to the landlord and the property manager. She made it clear, I don't feel safe living with this man. The housing company scheduled a meeting for April 26th. Tammy, her family joining remotely, and the company to discuss the situation and try to figure out how to get her somewhere safer. That meeting never happened. The company canceled. They didn't reschedule, didn't move her, didn't remove him. Life went on paper at least. And the day everything changed. Now we're at the day at the center of this story. It's April 26th, 2025. Tammy is just days away from what should have been her graduation. She's walking home. She calls her mother like she always did. And she tells her mom something no parent ever wants to hear. She's afraid of her roommate. Now remember, there were already incidents, already calls, already warnings. Tammy gets to the apartment. She walks in and she sees a sign, not a metaphorical one, a literal, disgusting one, that this situation has escalated beyond petty roommate drama. One of her shoes had been filled with feces. Think about the level of contempt, the level of malice it takes to do that to someone you live with. That's not a prank. That's a message. Still on the phone with her mother, Tammy confronts him. Why would you do this? What is wrong with you? The argument spikes. And then her mother hears it. Her daughter doesn't sound annoyed. She sounds terrified. She hears Tammy start to scream. Screaming help 3 times. Then the line goes dead. Back in London, or wherever her mother is at that moment, panic sets in. She can't get her daughter back on the phone. The family reaches out. A friend in the United States contacts authorities in Houston. They request a welfare check at Tammy's apartment. Houston police arrive at the complex in the 6500 block of Goforth Street. They knock, no answer. Somewhere on the other side of that door is the answer to what happened after that scream. Officers noticed something on the patio. It was blood. That was enough. They go in. Inside the apartment, they find Tammy on the kitchen floor. She's unresponsive, with multiple stab wounds. And in bedroom, they found her roommate, with injuries to himself. This asshole is still alive, and he's taken to the hospital under police watch. That's the end of that afternoon. But it's not the end of this story. Because when you rewind from that kitchen floor, back through the last few months, the last week, the last phone calls, you see a pattern. A young woman kept saying, "I don't feel safe." And the systems around her kept whispering back, "We hear you." But their actions kept saying, "We're not going to do anything about it." Now let's talk about this roommate and what was known about him. Because this episode isn't just about one individual's violence. It's about who let him into that apartment. Who was Christopher Chester Grant? Grant was about 40 years old, roughly double Tammy's age. He wasn't enrolled at her university. He wasn't part of a student cohort. He came into her life through a housing company, a background check firm that claimed to screen and protect people like her. On paper, that should mean if you got a long history of violent behavior, if you got serious domestic violence convictions, if you violated protective orders, you don't get matched up with a 23-year-old woman who moved there to study. But here's what Tammy's family would later find out. Grant, he had an extensive history of violence out of the state. He had multiple domestic violence-related convictions in the state of Washington. He had at least one felony. And he had a history of violating protective orders. According to Tammy's families, their lawyers, this wasn't hidden in some deep scale file. A simple Google search pulled it up. Now you tell me, if a grieving family can find that with a few clicks, what excuse does a professional background check company have? Tammy's family filed a lawsuit with two key players. They filed a wrongful death suit in Harris County, demanding at least $65 million in damages and alleging that negligence by the property management and screening companies led to Tammy being put in harm's way. The defendant's name in this suit are For a Place to Live, the Houston housing provider that matched Tammy with Grant as a roommate was called Safe Rent Solutions, which is a third-party company that conducted or failed to conduct properly Grant's background check. These companies advertise safety. They talk about screening and matching. They sell peace of mind. But here's what seems to have happened in practice. A man with a known violent history is allowed to move in as her roommate. When he allegedly becomes aggressive with her, she reports it. A meeting is scheduled with the housing company and then canceled. No emergency relocation for her. No urgent response to her report that she doesn't feel safe. If you zoom out, this becomes bigger than one apartment. It's about how profit and convenience often get prioritized over safety. It's about how background check systems can be shallow, incomplete, or simply ignored. It's about how sure some companies are that the worst case scenario is unlikely until it happens. We've seen versions of this pattern before. A woman says something wrong, "I'm scared of this person." She documents it. She calls the police. She informs the landlord. She tries to use the channels available to her. The response is often, "We'll schedule a meeting. We'll look into it. We'll talk about it later." Later doesn't come, but the danger does. I'm not here to demonize every landlord, every officer, and every company. But I am here to say this. When a woman tells you she feels unsafe in her own home, let's reschedule is not an adequate safety plan. And for international students like Tammy, the stakes are even higher. no extended family nearby, an immigration and housing tied to paperwork and contracts, a natural instinct to not make trouble in a system you're still learning. So when she does speak up, this is not the moment to be casual. Let's walk through what happened after that welfare check legally. After officers found Tammy in the kitchen and her roommate entered in the bedroom, Grant was taken to the hospital. He survived his self-inflicted injuries. Once he was stable enough, Houston police obtained a warrant and charged him with her death. He was booked into the Harris County Jail, facing a serious felony charge connected to Tammy's stabbing. His bond was set high, and as of the most recent updates, he remained in custody, awaiting trial. At a probable cause hearing, a judge reportedly called this a brutal case and made note of his violent history out of state. That history, again, is what makes all of this feel less likely a lightning strike and more like a storm people pretending not to see on the radar. Grant now sits at the center of the criminal process that could probably and should hold him accountable for his actions. But the Odunsi family understood something very clearly. Holding him accountable is only one layer of justice. The systems that gave him access to their daughter needed to answer too. I mentioned to you guys that Tammy's family filed a wrongful death lawsuit back in July of 2025, seeking tens of millions of dollars in damages. And the Tammy's family want you guys to know, it's not just about money. It's about precedent. Because right now there are thousands of students, especially women, especially international students, relying on companies like this to keep them safe in their shared living situations. If those companies know they can be held financially and publicly accountable for negligence, it changes the math. Suddenly, digging a little deeper into someone's past doesn't feel like extra work. It feels like self-preservation. While the legal battle moved forward in Houston's courtrooms, something deeply moving was happening back on campus. Texas Woman's University nursing graduation, the faculty and administrator made a decision. They would award Tammy her degree. Her sister, Georgina, traveled to Texas. She put on her sister's cap and gown and walked the stage on her behalf. Picture that, a sister crossing the graduation stage, not just for herself, but carrying her siblings' dreams on her shoulders, accepting the diploma, accepting the nursing pen, accepting in front of a crowd that someone who should have been there wasn't. That ceremony mattered, not because it makes up for what happened, nothing can, but because it refused to erase her just because she didn't live to see that day. And the world didn't just sit back and watch in silence. Her family started a fundraiser to help cover funeral costs and transport her body back to London. Her supporters, her classmates, fellow nursing students, her TikTok followers, she had over 30,000. People who never knew Tammy met her but saw themselves in her story. Thousands of people donated. They left messages about how she inspired them, how her study videos got them through exams, how her smile on screen made them feel less alone in their own grind. Her online community became a global vigil. Going into my reflection, I've been sitting with this case for a while, and I keep circling back to that same thought. We talk a lot about red flags when it comes to relationships and roommate situations. But what good is recognizing a red flag if no one with power responds when you raise it? Tammy did what we tell people to do. She didn't just vent in group chats. She didn't just post little cryptic messages. She reached out to the systems that are supposed to care. She informed the housing company. She involved her family. She contacted the police. She agreed to a meeting to address the problem. And still, the danger was treated like a scheduling issue. That's just what happened. I think about how many times women, especially black women, are expected to be strong and resilient, which are code words that sometimes mean we're going to wait and see how much you can endure before we take you seriously. I think about international students far from home trying to navigate this unfamiliar system, afraid of losing housing, afraid of being labeled difficult, afraid of being the one who rocks the boat. I think about how easy it was, apparently, to find Grant's violent history after Tammy died, and how hard it suddenly became for everyone involved to explain why they didn't find it before they matched him with her. And I also think about the way we talk about cases like this. We tend to center the harm, the headline, the brutality. But behind all that is a young woman who wanted to heal people, not become a case study in what happens when we ignore warning signs. Fuck that. From a justice lens, this case sits at the intersection of housing safety, background check accountability, gender-based violence, international student vulnerability, the chronic underreaction to women's fear. From a human's lens, it's this simple. A daughter called home, a mother heard her fear, a sister wore her cap and gown, and a family is now spending their lives in courtrooms and interviews, not graduations and celebrations. Statistics tell us that a disturbing percentage of women who lose their lives to violence had already told someone they felt unsafe. They had already made reports. They had already asked for help. The gap isn't just awareness, it's response. So if you're listening to this and you live with someone who makes you feel uneasy, I want you to hear me clearly. Your fear is data. Your discomfort is evidence. Your intuition is a kind of smoke signal. And in the Lounge of Truth, we believe something deeply. Where there is smoke, there is something that needs to be taken seriously. If you are afraid, reach out to friends, to family, to campus resources, to hotlines, to anyone who will take action, not just notes. And if you're someone in a position of authority, landlord, a property manager, RA, HR professional, a professor, a supervisor, I need you to understand when someone tells you they're scared of the person they're living with, this is not a customer service issue. This is a life safety issue. In Tammy's honor, the bare minimum we can commit to is this. The next time a woman says, I am not safe where I sleep, we treat that like the alarm it is, not like an appointment we can casually cancel. Because in the Lounge of Truth, we don't just watch the smoke. We ask where it's coming from, who is suffocating, and what we're going to do about it. And we remember, the smoke, it never lies. If this story moved you, and I hope it did, I want you to do 3 things. Say her name. Talk about Elizabeth Odunsi. Not just a headline, but as a future nurse, a creator, a daughter, a sister. Check your spaces. If you're in student housing, shared accommodation, or renting any kind of matching system, ask the hard questions about safety and screening. Don't wait until something happens to wonder if you could have done more. Stay connected with us. Subscribe to Cigar A Crime on YouTube. Follow the podcast on your favorite streaming platform. Follow us on social media. Comment your thoughts, share this episode, and tag someone who needs to hear how easily a preventable tragedy becomes a permanent loss. This show exists so these stories don't just disappear under the next wave of headlines. It exists so that someone, somewhere hears this and chooses to act one step earlier than they otherwise would have. If you know of a case that deserves this level of attention, especially where systems fail, someone who asks for help, drop it in the comments, send a message, or email the show. We're building this lounge of truth together. Tonight, we lit a cigar for a young woman who moved across an ocean to care for others. And instead, she was let down by the people and systems that meant to care for her. We honored Elizabeth. We looked at the choices that put her in harm's way. We named the failures that turned her warnings into echoes. This is Cigar A Crime, where we don't sensationalize pain, but we refuse to look away from the truth. I am your host, Dr. D, and I'll see you back here in the Lounge of Truth for the next case that demands more than silent sympathy. Oh, Mississippi. Until then, honor your intuition, check on your people, and remember, the smoke, it never lies.